This is Morning Express, and we're glad to have you here with us. As usual, we've got a great panel lined up for you for the newsroom. Now, the newsroom is where we look at some of the stories that have made headlines, others that maybe may not have made headlines, but possibly would have been. Also looking at some of the angles that we have covered in those stories and whether we've done a good job, and as to whether we've told the story as it is, whether we've been biased or not biased. And well, let me introduce the panel that we have with us this morning. I'll start with my immediate left here. We have Ngujiri Wambugu, who is a political analyst but also a writer.
Thank you. Hi.
Good to have you.
Excellent.
We also have Nancy Buka, who is a lecturer, Dr. Nancy Buka, who is a lecturer but also the chair for media department in the Multimedia University. Great to have you.
Great to have you, Michael.
Last but not least, David Ohito, who is the digital editor with us here with the Standard. Welcome, sir.
Morning.
All right, let me start maybe with you, Ngujiri, and maybe look at what has been a big story for you in the last 1 week. What has stood out?
I guess the teachers' conversation,
which has been going on for quite a while.
Yes, has been the big story consistently. Then, of course, there was the issue of the CS for devolution suing the court leader. Of course, over the last, we had the court rally last week, and the do you call it fallout or the output from that rally? So those are some of the interesting stories that have been going on. Yesterday it was an interesting story of on Kaindi, which I think we'll be talking about later, because every paper seems to be having its own story of exactly what happened on her case. Yeah.
All right, Nancy Buka.
Of course, the teachers strike, it's an ongoing story. So that is something that I've been following. There is a story of the 19-year-old girl who committed suicide after being tormented by somebody that she met online. And then, of course, there is the story of the 2 British journalists who have been who are likely to face up to 5 years jail time in Indonesia for entering the country on tourist visas to record to shoot a documentary on piracy. So that for me has also been a big story.
All right, David Ohito.
Thank you, Mike. I think for me, the release of Al Jazeera journalists by the Egyptian regime, that was a milestone for us in the trade. And then we had the New York UN meeting in which Kenya had a very strong presence, and of course the President Uhuru Kenyatta meeting with UK counterpart, Premier David Cameron. And there was the story of the young man young Kenyan boy living with HIV/AIDS, who was given a standing ovation. I think it is time to celebrate that young man. And of course teachers strike, and that they were joined by the opposition for a rally that has led to many other things. And of course we had up to 6 Kenyans who were confirmed dead in the pilgrimage to Mecca, and reportedly 9 are still missing. Those have been defining headlines. And of course Kenyan marathoners, road runners conquered Berlin at the weekend.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Let's start with the story of the 19-year-old, because that has serious implications. And the social media went abuzz yesterday, especially after one of the ladies who claimed to be the picture is hers, said that she's alive and well. And again, looking at it from the perspective of having taken a story, breaking the story without verifying all the details and ensuring that you have the right facts. And I'll start with you, Nancy. How do we get to a point where you report a story, and such a sad story? I mean, you can imagine seeing yourself on the papers as being dead if indeed the picture belongs to somebody else.
Thank you, Michael. I think the story raises lots of questions, and there was a lot of debate yesterday, a lot of talk on social media, and even within media houses as to the credibility of the story. Of course, later on, reliable sources say that the picture of the girl, the picture that accompanied the story was not of the girl who, apparently committed suicide. And that speaks to what I would call armchair journalism, where journalists are not doing everything that it takes to validate the stories that they are publishing. And of course it raises various questions. Even if the story is true, when you accompany it with wrong pictures and you literally kill somebody before their death, then it raises various questions. Of course, on Twitter was a buzz yesterday with friends of the girl, telling her to sue the paper that actually published that. It would be interesting to see how that story unfolds. I think it would be nice, to see the paper actually coming out and admitting that they were at fault.
And the story they actually have today is that they've not fully admitted that they're at fault. They've just said that it's alleged.
It is
that,
alleged.
there are two people who have come out and said that this is my picture. David Ohito, you're in the newsroom every single day. What would cause a journalist, or what would bring somebody to a point where you publish a story without verifying, and even it hits the front page? It was on the front page of the Nation yesterday. And what would cause you to actually get to that point where you're practicing what Dr. Nancy Buka is referring to as armchair journalism?
Michael, there are two things that happen here. One is that there was serious professional breach, and two, that ethical concerns were thrown out of the window. But this is always determined by the desire to be number one to publish a story, the desire to be the one attracting more clicks. We live in a digital era, and I work in that platform, which is very dangerous. Just one tweet wrong can send you, and this is, it's not the first time it's happening to our competitors, but I think they should tighten up the rules. The processes of verifying, fact-checking must really be very tight. And even in the unlikely event that you publish such a story, then you should be able to have very instantaneous redress measures. I'm glad the editors took down the story. It doesn't matter the kind of explanation they're trying to say that two people came up. Damage has been done. People have been sent into lots of shock. You can imagine if you wake up and find my picture on page 1 saying David Ohito is dead. I mean, you cause more trouble and trauma to families and friends than even the individual himself or herself. So going forward, I think there must be thorough fact-checking, not just the mere competition that we are the first with this story. And it was not, no, Nation is a multimedia house with presence in the region. It was headlined on Taifa Leo, it was on page 1 in the main paper, and also very prominently displayed on their digital platform. So in the unlikely event, I wouldn't want the editor to be sued or the media house to be sued. There are so many challenges that lie ahead for that media house.
Gunjiri, should there be an oversight body that ensures when things like this happen, then they're dealt with and dealt with properly to avoid carelessness? Because I mean, I cannot imagine if, like David Ohito says, you see a picture of somebody who's alive there and it says it's dead prominently. I mean, it really has ethical issues that it raises.
It does. Though I do think, unlike most other stories that media houses break, this really did not look like a scoop. In my opinion, it's the kind of story that they were running that most probably no other media house was going to be running. So I want to give them the benefit of the fact that, of the doubt in that being actually a legitimate mistake, rather than somebody running to the press to take a story that the competition will not have. Though on the flip side of that is that you'd expect, and this is something that I have seen with a lot of media houses, you'd expect that somebody would actually call the family, confirm a couple of the details before that story goes into press, and I get the feeling that didn't happen. The second thing, and this is where I agree with Nancy, is that you get the feeling of the fact that nobody actually went out to do research. They sat somewhere in a seat and Googled, either Google pictures or, and I know that has happened a lot. I sometimes come across a story that I have written, and then the picture that they've used is something that they must have collected somewhere from the internet rather than looked for. So I get the impression that's most probably what happened. Or somebody went to the lady's Facebook page and took the picture of a friend of that girl, or those. So you get the impression that we're not having as much due diligence going into development of a story before it goes out into publishing. You also feel as if the kind of stories that are being developed by mainstream media are the kind of stories you see on social media, just being transferred into the newspaper, which, because on social media you get a lot of, because of the urgency and the immediacy of the issue, you get a lot of stories that don't have backup. And you most probably can understand that on the digital platforms, or no, actually not even on, not on digital platforms of main media houses. You'd understand that from personal accounts and personal blogs and stuff like that. So sometimes you get the impression, and I have seen that happen with a couple of stories, that somebody picked a story from from an individual's blog or an individual's account on the internet and just transported it, freshened it up a bit and put it in a newspaper. And that is most probably the kind of thing that happened with that story.
Okay, Nancy, there is a narrative that the story is true but the picture is wrong. Would you rather have the story run without the picture, if you don't have not verified the picture, than to have the whole thing now shambled, because it deals a blow in the how valid now anybody would think that story is, just because of the picture, even if the story is true?
I think it questions the validity not just of that story, but of many others. And you ask yourself, because we believe media content, in terms of what it covers. When we read stories, we actually want to, we approach the stories from the point of view that the journalists who are writing the stories, and especially for main media houses, that's what separates what I see on social media and what I see on personal blogs with what I see on the newspaper, or what I see on a mainstream television station, for example. That there is, we trust the media, and that's where society has placed media. And so when you have such a story, whether the picture is right or wrong, whether the picture is the wrong thing or the story, it casts aspersions on the credibility of media. So that, when that story broke out yesterday, of course, when I saw it in the morning on the front page of Nation, my first reaction is, I work with a lot of young people, so of course, what does this mean? And then only later on in the day for it to come out that the story had certain information that was questionable. Then the question is, how much of the paper then can I believe? And the most important thing, and especially for us in training and in media practice, what does this mean for us? We deal with a generation of young people who want to be the first ones to tell everything. And when you have this kind of practice, then finding its place in a newsroom, then there are questions. By the time a story is getting onto the front page of a paper, and Ohito will attest to this, that there are various checks and balances that have to be put in place, that certain facts have to be verified. And in such a case, if the story is credible and you do not have the right pictures, you're safer running the story without a picture, than the kind of damage that you now have to deal with as a result of carrying pictures that are not that are actually not true.
Now, David Ohito, should we now settle for the fact that these, which we traditionally know as newspapers, are no longer newspapers? They are context papers, in the sense that with the digital platform, that's news. The minute there's an accident on Mombasa Road, within 5 seconds, it can be news. So by the time it gets to the print, it really is not news. What we can do is talk about the context. What happened? Was it the driver who slept? Was he drunk? So it's no longer a newspaper, but a context paper.
Mike, to a great extent, you're very right. We are living in very difficult times, especially for newspaper editors. Belong to that old school of the traditional journalists that you must verify, and if you are in doubt, leave out. That is what we are always taught. But we are living in very difficult times, and I've always raised this on very many platforms, that how come that even God rest his soul, the death of Fidel Odinga could be broken by Robert Alai? Where were news hounds? Where were news reporters? Where are our contacts and sources? We slept on the job. And by the time we were going on air, it was almost 2 hours after Alai had broken the story. So how then does a newspaper editor and reporter today survive in this competitive digital era, where information moves faster than the most powerful weapon on earth? It's very difficult, but I'm trying to understand my colleague at Nation and what he was trying to do. You have seen content, and if you have analyzed content in recent days of both Nation Standard, even Star, we are trying to test the markets with a little social stories. So an editor may have his antenna raised on the digital platform and see what is trending, what is catchy, and try and get that story into the same context you're talking about on the newspaper. But still, the rules of the game remain unchanged. Verify, fact-checked, and make sure you are safe before you go to print. Same media house, not so long ago, allegedly broke the news of a very prominent politician who had passed on, until the family of the politician said, we are in hospital, dad is still alive, how come you're saying he is dead? So these are challenges that continue to confront us, but I advocate for continuous training and investment in digital media. Unless we retrain all our editors, retrain our reporters to be aware of the dangers in this platform, we're going to run the risk.
All right, Ngunjiri, I don't know what your thought is in terms of where we are in the digital age. Should we be thinking of phasing out print paper? Because, I mean, internet is something which is going to be accessible in another few years, almost anywhere. And the newspaper really, with time, could be losing its place in society.
I think not. I think we most probably have the same argument that, or the same discussion that people had about radio when TV came, and there was a feeling that, you know, now radio is done because TV has come, but then radio found its slot and TV has its slot, and now what we are going to have is a situation where newspapers are going to have their slot and digital or social media is going to have its slot. But then something that Nancy said is going to be very important for digital. We have to trust newspapers. I mean, for the one thing that is going to help newspapers survive is trust. It needs to be the kind of place you go to confirm a story that you most probably saw doing the rounds on social media. And this is the danger of digital and social media, is that you use the same rules that you've used. If journalists use the same rules that they've used, where you get two sources, Now if you're doing two sources on the social media, you're most probably going to have the same story in multiple places, and you're going to be saying, but I got it from multiple sources. So there has to be the whole idea of how do you verify a story. You know, for a long time, what was it called? Foot journalism, where you actually walked around and got a story. You needed to get the story, then you'd have to get another independent source to confirm, to verify your story. Now, when you have a lot of stories making the rounds on the social media, there's always going to be the danger that your verification is going to be on the same platform. So you have a story breaking on one blog or one particular place, and then you must probably go and verify. You start trying to confirm whether it's actually verifiable, and you find it in many other places, and before you know it, you assume it is true because it's trending, but without realizing that maybe the first person who broke it, everybody else has picked it from there and just expanded it, and so it was wrong right from the start. But because it's all over the place, you're assuming it can't be wrong. So and that
should we change our way of sourcing for the stories and verifying, because we seem to be getting the verification from the same spot? I think what is going to be required, that part of the training that Ohito is talking about, is going to be, you can get a breaking story from the social media or digital media or digital platforms, but you must verify it outside social media. You most probably want to call someone. You must have a factual, another source outside the social media, because social media is very dynamic, and a story goes around so quickly that when it breaks, and the example he used of a prominent politician, and the story had gone that he had died. In fact, there was even another prominent media house owner who, again, a story broke that they had died because somebody who because somebody who has a similar name had passed away, and before you knew it, it had spread like wildfire. Why? Because the first person who broke that story made one mistake with one name, and then everybody else picked that story and started confirming it, and yes, it is true, and yes, it is true. Now, if a journalist picked the first story and then went around and found that a certain other media house has confirmed it, another media house has confirmed, you assume it must be correct. But nobody actually went out. By the time people are now calling the media house itself to confirm, the story had already gone out. Yes. Nancy, in terms of training, how are we training our journalists to ensure that we have multiple sources? Because we are living in a dispensation of Google. where everything can be verified by Google. Even doctors have a problem today, because the minute they tell you take a certain medicine, the first place you go is Google and check what are the side effects. So with that dispensation, how do we verify?
I think it's not even doctors who have a challenge. I mean, when I have a headache, I'll Google and find out, you know, what is it that I can take? And I put down all the symptoms and try and find medication and self-medicate. So it's a challenge that we have to contend with. And you know, it's interesting that even in a classroom setup, what you typically experience is, you know, you ask students to write a news story, and the first place that they will go is on their smartphones, you know, to get onto the net and find you know, sources that they can quote. And what that means is that when they now finally write the story, they'll tell you, you know, unconfirmed reports or sources that have said they don't want to be named or disclosed. You know, you see a lot of that, and you know, that is also finding its place in a number of the stories that we are seeing.
Right.
When you look at most of the newspapers today, a number of stories, you cannot actually put a name to these sources, and you find a story has 3 or 4 people who have all said they do not want to be identified, and questions then are raised about the credibility of that story. And so I think the onus is on us right from training, and even when they get into media houses, to inculcate in our students the fact that they need to actually verify stories. They need to put names to the stories for the stories to be trusted. And that is what is going to make the difference, even when, you know, the newspaper morphs onto the online platform. That the reason why I'm going to trust a particular source online is because there are sources that have been mentioned, and that the story can actually be attributed to certain names and certain people for that story to stand out from everybody else, you know. So much so that when I see something on a personal blog or on social media, the next thing that I want to go and see is, has any media house covered it?
Right.
And what are the facts that they're giving, you know, to be able to accompany the story? It's interesting, Gujiri talks about, you know, a particular media owner who was essentially killed by you know, by a media house. And I you know, I had the story broke out on radio, and the first thing is, you know, call sources and ask, what is this that I'm hearing?
What happened?
And they're, you know, they're all asking, where did you hear it from? And interestingly, when the radio station came back on air, they didn't apologize, you know, for that mistake.
Yeah,
they didn't correct it, you know, and just
They
went
clarified.
on, you know. They didn't even clarify. You know, the next time it came on, it was a different name, and so you almost look like the fool, you know. Did I hear
wrong?
Did I hear wrong? And I think the first, you know, it is important, you know, that when media houses make mistakes, that they eat humble pie and say, you know, we are sorry, you know, and all that. Of course, the question is, if you keep apologizing, and then the credibility. Yeah, but it is a challenge, not just you know, even for us in training and in education, that you know, trying to shift and you know, help our students realize that not everything that is online is credible, and that you need to go out, step out of that seat, you know, the armchair journalist, step out of that seat and walk and verify facts, make phone calls, you know, ask around, use the teamwork within the media houses to be able to do that. When I was practicing journalism, you would actually walk to sources. You would, you know, ask the people that you're working with, you know, and your stories would not be trusted if the whole day you were sitting at your desk. You know, somebody needed to see that there was actually physical movement or phone calls that had been made to verify that information.
Okay.
And I think that's the direction that we need to
So
go.
Hito, are we losing, has that journalism, the traditional way of finding stories, lost its place? She's mentioned that a story would not be credible or viewed as credible unless you had literally walked there, seen the person. But in the age we're living in, it's digital. You have Google, you have WhatsApp, you can send videos, you can get all that, you can call. And are we losing that place? Again, the traffic that is there, and you're fighting against the digital platform that breaks the story almost every second. How do we balance the two to keep the traditional method of finding the story, and here you are competing with a very fast world?
Well, the rules of the game, as I said before, really do not change. We must go out and verify, fact-check, and cross-check that whatever we are publishing to be in the public domain meet the basic standards. They are factual, they are truthful, because our trade is about truth. And as long as we're going to miss out on truth and facts, then we have no credibility, we have no standing. Which is why I say that I think there's time to retrain all of us. And the digital platform is very, very tricky. You have parody accounts, or we call the fake accounts. So you have Michael Gitonga. I had you just say your Twitter handle, and somebody just needs to put a comma somewhere and still say Michael Gitonga, right. And he can use your photo, which he pulls out of Facebook, and you are not sure which account is really telling you the truth. So, and some of these news sources are just phone calls away or text message away, so you can still verify and fact check that this is the true info, because we run the risk at this time when we no longer receive press releases which are hand delivered or courier delivered to our desk. You know, I can remember a dozen times the president himself has been breaking news or sending his statements on his Twitter handle or State House handle. Ministers are doing the same. Ministers are updating on their websites and social media platforms, and they've hired teams to also help them do these kind of new ways of communication. So we cannot run away from the digital developments that are confronting us, because if you do that, we're going to lose the audiences also. But we must remain factual, we must remain accurate, we must remain objective, we must remain fair and balanced all the time.
All right. Let me very briefly, I want us to move on to something else.
I think let me just add on to what you know, David is raising. That you know, the reason why this profession exists is truth. You know, that's essentially why you know, media exists, and the audience is very unforgiving. You know, all the other stories that you know, the paper that, you know, Nation carried yesterday could be true. But that's just one story. Now makes you doubt everything, you know, and it means that for us to be able to protect the integrity of the profession, that whatever it takes, if it's verifying, if it means not running with a story because you cannot verify even just one aspect of it, then forget about it until you have the facts right. Yeah.
I wanted to also add on to something that we just talked about in terms of how press. How communication is being done these days, especially by newsmakers, where you have the president or cabinet secretaries or other people creating, putting up news on social media, and the danger of that is also the issue that we talked about parody accounts. I've been a victim of a parody account that was set up in 2011 or 2012 that actually did 10 tweets only. It's got my picture, it's got my name. Though my name has been misspelled. And that account, one of the tweets was an insult to now the current president and the president. And it keeps being used to date. To date. That particular tweet keeps being copy-pasted. You know, every time they want to attack me based on some comments I've made that are favorable to the president, somebody will go and pick up that tweet and post it and say, look at how much he has changed. And that's the danger we have in a situation where you're picking news that you're then not verifying. You have, for example, the Interior Ministry has an official account. It's very easy for somebody else to create another account with the same name, with the picture of either the cabinet secretary or the IG, and what usually happens with a lot of parody accounts that are successful is that most of the stories you tell, most of the things they run are true. They'll actually pick from the main account and run those accounts and just keep copy pasting. But then every now and again there'll be a slant to a story. Now what happens is that if the person who is running stories is getting, that is their primary source, you find yourself having quoted a fake account of Museveni, or a fake account of Raila, or a fake account of Uhuru, and you run with the story. Or there's also the flip side where you actually quoted a real account and then the owner has said he was hacked. We've had that many times. Why? Because the story you broke or what you said was wrong. But you don't want to come back and say you were wrong, and you'll say you lost control of your account for a few minutes or for a day.
I guess there could also be the aspect of the story being correct, but I don't want to admit it, so I can.
Yes, and you say no, that wasn't.
You've misquoted me. You've misunderstood what I meant
to say. And we haven't reached a point where we even have a law that actually allows you to use. I don't know whether the law allows you to use digital information, even if it's from my account, and then go and say that Gunjiri said. But you see, the media has gotten us to the point where they're taking a story from a digital platform and then giving it as if it is an actual complete factual truth. While there are so many gray areas that include the person themselves who tweeted backtracking and saying no, it wasn't me.
Yeah,
so that gray area,
yes,
that gray area is where the media find the mainstream media, as I call it, needs to be very careful, because they're going to lose credibility because of that particular.
Let's move on now to something else, the teacher strike. And Nancy, we've talked about this teacher strike. Now we're on week 5, and there's, I mean, even legal jargon right now is out there. So if you're not a lawyer, you could almost qualify to be a lawyer just if you followed the story. But in terms of covering and looking after the children, have we highlighted the plight of the children in all this adequately?
I think we have. I remember when we first sat here a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the missing the voices of the children, of those whose children are going to public schools, missing the voice of the teachers, and the need, for media houses or journalists to go out and talk to them and find out, what exactly, paint a picture for us. And over the last couple of weeks, we have seen that happening. We have seen instances where journalists have gone out to public schools and highlighted the plight of many of the children going into public schools. I think for me, I would say the coverage has been sustained, has been well done. It's now getting a little technical, so what we're hoping for is a quick resolution so that the children can go back to school. The challenge for me in covering these stories, and I don't have an answer here, is when journalists make themselves part of the story. And I'm talking about an instance where, a TV story, I think it was earlier this week or sometime last week, where a reporter goes to a school and sits in the classroom and is also now part of the pupils being taught by another student in the class, because the teachers are not there, and they're taking notes, and then they sign off from the seat talking about the challenges. And as I said, I have no answer when it comes to that. When reporters make themselves part of the story in that context.
Are you saying there's anything wrong with that?
I'm just saying that sometimes it trivializes the story.
So what would you rather, that a student does that because they're in it?
Yes, because at the point at which the journalist was reporting, they were actually almost in the same kind of color of uniform as the students. So for a while, you actually are not sure, who the journalist is, whether it's a student or whether it's a pupil in the class or the journalist. So being able to balance that, of course, appreciating the fact that that then it makes it a lot more real and a lot more that they were on site, But the question is, where do we draw the line? And I guess that's debatable.
Yeah, maybe they were following in the footsteps of the rally, where
that's exactly what came to my mind.
Politicians dressed in uniform. Gunjiri, do you think that is trivializing it, as Dr. Buka puts it?
Actually, it's not even. As she was speaking, I kept remembering those pictures of members of parliament dressed in shorts, some eating lollipops and carrying small bags.
Small bags, yes.
And this has been the problem about the teachers' strike. It's been so long. And Kenya has a 14-day cycle on news as a maximum, where in 14 days a story tends to have completely disappeared. And you can tell there's media houses are really struggling to keep introducing new angles to this story to keep it alive. And it's amazing. I mean, you still have TSC and the teacher's story in today's headline, at least in the Standard. Tells you how amazing this story has been
and how dynamic it is.
Yes, to get to this point. And part of the challenge that I guess media houses and journalists are getting, sometimes I get the impression either somebody has been put on the beat, has been told I need another story on the teacher's strike, and the guy has to wake up and think, okay, now every angle of this story.
The stories have been changing. Like now, today, for it to be on the headlines is based on the court proceedings yesterday.
But you see, the kind of things that are changing are so small that you actually can't. What we are suffering from as a country is that the teacher strike is still a very important part of us as a country on a national, in terms of national conversation. But the kind of things that are changing are so small, you can't sustain the impact. So everybody knows the teachers, the fact that children are at home, teachers are on the streets, TSC and NAT are wrangling in court is a major thing. And I guess the media has gotten stuck on the point that we must make this, we must keep it right in front of people's faces because it's a big thing. But then the problem is, how do you sustain that, considering that you take 4 days before any news story breaks? So in between the court cases, in between a press conference by Association, you have 2 days or 3 days, and you have to sustain this story. So what do? You go and take a drive to some random school, and you sit in that school and you make a story, you know, or you pick another narrative and you run with it. And for me, what I see as a danger of that is, first and foremost, you have one-sided stories at different times of this story. What do I mean? That on a Monday you'll have a story that is about the children. On Tuesday you'll have a story that is about TSC. On Wednesday you have a story that is about NAT. On Thursday you have a story that's about government. Now all this is important, but assume you don't buy newspapers every day. So you read the story on Monday about children, and that is the narrative you walked away with. And then you meet somebody who read the story on Tuesday, which gave the story of the union's position. And then on Wednesday you met. So what we are getting from the media, I wish the media would ensure that every narrative, every particular story they run has all the stories, has all the parts of that story.
Is that possible, given that you have a limited space to do that?
But think about this, think about it. This story has many facets to it. At any given time, you have the child, you have the teacher, you have the government, TSC, you have the union. At any particular moment. I know it might be asking for a lot, but now the story has reached 5 weeks. We are now at context. You know what you are talking about? We are no longer at breaking news. We are now at context. Every day you have this story, what you are giving is a context. And I wish it was possible to give, and that used to happen a lot in the past. You know, before we got into this digital fast, any story you read in the newspaper tended to be complete, comprehensive, with all the angles in it. And in fact, for a long time, you'd hear somebody saying, I can't run that story because I don't have the other side. Okay. But we don't get that a lot.
David, do you feel that that's a valid point, that it needs to have, every story that runs needs to have all the angles in this particular, and especially when it's been going on for so long?
It's difficult to sustain it because we have very limited space and airtime to do that, if we are to do it practically. And we must also remind Gwinjiri that we are in business, we are not in charity anymore. We are determined by the content and influenced by our audiences as well. So our core duty is to public audiences. What do they want to read? Teaching fraternity is too big, the numbers only. That is why you still see the headline, because there's no single profession near the numbers that teachers have. Two, there's nearly every other family has somebody going to school. They may be going to private school like yours and Dr. Buka's, but they are still
that could be an assumption.
That's an assumption.
Yes, and I agree, we are getting into audience fatigue. It's moved beyond just a labor dispute. Now it's going to tactical matters. You see the politicians weighing in with very colorful uniforms, and that deflects the thinking and the mind frame of the editor and the reporters too. You see M-Pesa accounts coming up, and the drama that comes with it. You see the utterances, which I found really nothing wrong to. I listened to 1,000 times. I don't see why they should accuse Mudama of anything. And I think there are better jobs even for those related officers that are purporting to summon Mudama. I think Kenya needs services from those officers than just listening to Mudama. So it's a very, very tricky time again for the editors. But the news scenario is equally dry. So what do? You have to go to press. You have to find a story.
Nancy, how do we measure fatigue when it comes to a story like this? How do we measure that we need to continue with this story and it's important to continue, as opposed to even maybe changing where it is on the newspaper? Because we do know that front page, the first 3 pages are normally highlights of, you know, what I'd call big stories. But now with the teachers, it's been going on and on and on. Should we be taking it towards the end of the newspaper or the back pages?
I don't think we should take it towards the back pages or, you know, hide it somewhere in the middle, because it is an important story. Looking at, you know, just the place of even the teacher in an economy. You know, somebody was saying the other day that, you know, when teachers are not earning, there is a whole, you know, part of society that suffers, and because of where we find teachers in every corner, and the numbers, and then of course the number of children who attend public schools. So we cannot wish it away, even when there is fatigue, and you know, audiences might be fatigued. Unfortunately, the kind of audience that is likely to, you know, attend to media might not necessarily be facing the consequences firsthand, you know, because they're the ones with children in private schools, and they have moved on to other things. But you know, the bulk of the citizenry is interested in that story. The challenge, of course, as Zohito says, is sustaining you know, that kind of coverage. And whereas, you know, in the past we would, you know, situate the whole, I mean, put a complete story, so to speak, with social media coming in, the question is, and editors also struggle with this, is how much, you know, can I put on, how much do I you know, withhold and report on a little later, so that with every you know, with every or so at every hour, so to speak, there is a new development, you know, so that for a station like KTN News, you know, even when you're following a story, with every hour we want to see an update, we want to see something more current, a development. And so with that you know, there is the tendency to report just as much and then hold on to some of it, so that you're able to keep, you know, to remain different, and to remain relevant, right, and something new. Okay. So there is, in as much as you might, you know, we might imagine that there is burnout, there isn't. I mean, okay, because very many families are being affected. You know, very many children are being affected, and the fact that, you know, the education sector as a whole, you know, I think what we would want to see is an end to it. I think we really don't, we haven't gotten to the point where we really understand what it means when a child misses 5 weeks of school, and what this means not just for them now, you know, but in future. The impact in future. I think that is what has been missing. Okay. You know, that it's such a huge problem in the lives of the children who are in public schools now, that we seem to ignore that and just focus on the strike itself, and the fact that, you know, teachers need to be paid, and then of course, you know, some of the political angles that, you know, this has taken, without necessarily looking into, you know, what this actually means for these children, you know, in terms of influencing their future. You know. All right.
Let's look at the United Nations General Assembly. I think time is almost running out, and I want us to cover that as well. And in terms of the information that has been coming and developments that have been done, Ngunjiru, your take on how the coverage has been so far. I know KTN has done quite a lot in terms of even having reporters there. Yes. Sophia Onuna is there. Alex Chamwada is there.
Michael, I'll ask you to allow me to make one comment about the teachers, as I move on to this one. Right. and it's also, and I really hope somebody who's doing media is going to actually do right on the whole aspect of how TSC, how the media has covered the story of the teachers' strike, because I think there are a lot of lessons to learn. One of them has been that we are talking about how the media has been developing the story, but there's also been a flip side, how either whether it's the union or TSC or government or the political class has been using the story, and how they have made for media. We've actually seen events made for media, because they all understand that the media is struggling to keep the story alive. We've seen now, for example, the issue of CORD and the uniforms. We've seen press conferences on a regular basis, whether from the union or from the government. What they're doing is that they are feeding into this media frenzy, because they understand, and the media it's a cycle. The media is looking for a story, and so what is happening is that the people who are stakeholders in the story are being forced to consistently come up with something. And so at some point you get to the point where you start moving away from the main story to now the sideshows of the story, and you lose the primary story. For example, nobody's asking when the union says that we are not ready to do exams, we are not going to to supervise exams. The children are not ready for this exam. What are they saying? Are we going to move these exams to next term? Are we saying that we are going to scrap the entire year and do these exams next year? Nobody is asking that story. Nobody is asking that question. The exams are supposed to start at a certain point. Nobody has gone and asked, okay, so they're not going to be done. When are they going to be done? These children have spent 8 years or 4 years preparing for this exam, and then you're telling them it's not going to be done. So nobody is actually following that story, and that's the ramifications I wish were being looked at. Now, going to UNGA, it's been interesting. One of the interesting things about UNGA was even the media confusion at the beginning of that narrative. At some point, we had the president had left, then he hadn't left, then he wasn't leaving, and then he left. You know, and again, nobody has gone back to ask questions about, so what was that about?
The initial report was that he was leaving on Monday.
Yes.
Then come Wednesday, he was still in the country.
There was one media house that said he'd gone to South Africa and came back. Then another media house that said that UNGA has been cancelled. Actually, it was breaking news that the president has cancelled his trip to... And then all through, you get the feeling that it was speculation or rumors that were running those stories, because you never got an attribution to a particular person around the president. You got the story, the president's trip has been cancelled. The president has left. The president is not leaving. And then when he finally left, in fact, I wasn't sure that to believe he's gone or not, because now by then we had Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. By the time we were saying he's left, you're like, okay. And then people didn't understand, because you travel back in time. So he left on Thursday evening and landed on Thursday in New York. And you're wondering, so did he leave earlier and we never got to know about it? So that's some of the parts of the confusion of this story. But of course, it's been interesting to see media houses take reporters and journalists to UNGA. It's a sign of the times that you now have to be in there. And I wish now they could transport that on, you could have that factual verification on site on other stories, because you in any other event, you don't take media people. You'll most probably be having the armchair people just waiting and Google and waiting for for them to say something, and then they report it. So that's been, for me, that has been the primary thing that I have noticed. This idea of having a lot more media people traveling to the site of an event that is happening
on the ground.
I don't know whether the story was developed by government or whether media actually decided the story was important enough to send people to. But it's an interesting, be an interesting observation.
Ohito, a step in the right direction regarding having a media presence on such, big meetings.
Yes, for me that was a very positive move by Kenyan media houses. I know there was support from other quarters, but it tells us how critical that meeting was. But let's look at the takeaways. The story of the young boy who really moved guys. This was really a touching story, getting a standing ovation at that age, living with HIV, AIDS, positively from that age. For me, that was a momentous story, well told and well prepared at the right forum, and tells the critical people that they must support people living with these conditions. Two, I was equally impressed by the president's speech, and more importantly, when the Chinese premier say that there are no more ivory imports into China. That again for me was a score, particularly for Kenya, a country that has suffered the effects of poaching to a great extent. So I think those of us who love animals, elephants, rhinos, we must say kudos. UNGA did us proud for this time round. I didn't pay much attention to what Bob Mugabe was saying, but I saw his head in so many TV stations. But I must say, at least our presence, I saw like every other TV station had a very strong crew down there. And so it tells us what's happening at that.
Dr. Booker, in regards to Elijah Lamayan and the story that he had to tell, the fact that he got a standing ovation, we have this tendency as media houses to pick that up. As soon as he lands, we'll swamp him and have him in all the studios. Then after that, the story dies. How do we carry that story on? Because his speech is not powerful just because he was able to articulate it, but the story behind the speech.
I think one. Of course, it gave Kenya prominence, at this meeting, and it's unfortunate that then we gain prominence because of the condition, that he has had to live with. But his courage and the fact that he can speak especially about stigma for persons living with HIV/AIDS, and especially children, is a big thing. And in terms of sustaining the coverage beyond, having him appear in media houses, is looking at HIV and AIDS among young people in a country such as this. I think just last week there was a report that was released about the fact that 29% of all new infections, HIV new infections, tend to are occurring among young people between the ages of 15 to 24, and that's a critical mass. That's the future of any economy, and the questions then, for us to be able to try and or some of the issues that we need to talk about is, as a country, what are we doing to ensure that, one, we reduce those infections, the high number of infections among that critical mass, but two, how do we deal with issues of stigma, for young people? And I think that's a debate that needs to to carry on, because one of the most important things that Lemayan talks about is stigmatization, especially of children and youth who are living.
So we need to pick that up.
We need to be able to pick that up.
Sorry, I'll have to cut you short because we are time up, but thank you so very much. That is where we're going to wind up Newsroom. Thank you very much, David Ohito, who is a digital editor here with the Standard, Dr. Buka, who is the chair at the Media Department, Multimedia University, and last but not least, Gunjiru Wambugu, who is a political analyst and also a writer with The Star. That's where we wind up Morning Express this morning. Thank you for joining us. Do stand by for the news coming up at 8 o'clock. It's been a pleasure hosting you. Have yourselves a wonderful day. God bless.